The world outside Elias's cabin was a roaring white monster. The blizzard had come not as weather, but as an entity, swallowing the pine forests and granite peaks of the North Rim in its furious, frozen belly. Inside, the silence was just as deep, just as cold, but it was a silence Elias had cultivated. It was the silence of a life interrupted. He sat in his worn armchair, the fire casting long, dancing shadows that were the only company he kept. In his hands was a photograph, its edges soft from too much handling. Elara, her smile was a splash of summer sun in the perpetual winter of his heart. 2 years. 2 years since the car skidded on black ice. 2 years since the phone call. 2 years since he'd moved out here to the edge of the world, where the memories were at least as stark and beautiful as a landscape. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin, making the logs groan. And beneath that roar, there was something else. Elias froze, his knuckles white on the photo frame. He listened. It came again, a faint, high-pitched sound, thin and desperate as a needle threading the storm. A cry. His first thought was a trick of the wind, whistling through a fissure in the eaves. But it came again, a shivering wail that was unmistakably alive. An animal, a fox, maybe, or a coyote pup separated from its pack. In this weather, it was a death sentence. He stood, his joints protesting. The compassionate thing, the sensible thing, was to ignore it. Nature had its own brutal rules out here. But another howl, this one choked and weak, seemed to spear directly into the hollow space in his chest. It was a sound of pure, undiluted loneliness. He knew that sound. He heard it every time he looked in the mirror. With a sigh of fog in the cold air, he pulled on his heavy coat, his thick boots, and wrapped the scarf around his face. He grabbed his powerful flashlight and an old wool blanket. Opening the door was a battle. The wind seized it, trying to rip it from his grasp, and a wall of stinging snow blasted him. He squinted, shining the beam into the shifting, chaotic white. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the gale. "Where are you?" The cry came again, closer now, from the lee side of the woodshed, a place where the snow had drifted into a deep, soft mound. He trudged towards it, the snow sucking at his boots, the cold biting through his trousers. The flashlight beam swept across the drift, and there, nestled in a small hollow, was a shape. It was small, no larger than a loaf of bread, and almost completely buried. Only a patch of dark, wet fur and a tiny, twitching snout were visible. It wasn't a fox or a coyote. It looked like a puppy, a ridiculously small, hopelessly vulnerable puppy, its eyes still sealed shut. "Ah, little fellow," Elias whispered, his heart clenching. "What are you doing out here?" He knelt, brushing the snow away with his gloved hands. The creature was ice cold, its breathing shallow. It was a miracle it was still alive. As he touched it, it let out another weak cry, a sound that held no hope, only the final exhaustion of a life giving up. "Not on my watch," Elias murmured, his voice thick. He couldn't save Elara. He couldn't change his past. But this small frozen life, this he could fight for. He worked quickly, gently scooping the tiny creature into the blanket, cradling it against his chest inside his coat. He could feel the faint, frantic beat of his heart against his own. He turned and fought his way back to the cabin, the storm howling its protest behind him. Back inside, with the door bolted against a raging world, Elias knelt by the fire. He unwrapped the blanket. The puppy was a pitiful sight. Its fur was a strange, smoky gray, almost silver when the firelight caught it. It had unusually large paws for its size, and its ears, though pinned back in fear and cold, had a subtle, sharp points to them. But its most striking feature was a single, jagged white mark, like a lightning bolt or a scar, that ran from between its closed eyes up over its forehead. Elias fetched a rag, soaked it in warm water, and began to gently wipe the caked ice from its fur. The puppy squirmed, letting out a tiny, protesting squeak. "Shoo, it's all right," Elias soothed, his voice a low rumble he barely recognized as his own. "You're safe now." He found an eyedropper and managed to get a few drops of warm milk and water into its mouth. For a long time, he just sat there on the bearskin rug, holding the tiny, shivering body, willing his own warmth into it. He watched its chest rise and fall, each breath a little stronger than the last. As the storm finally began to subside, its roar fading to a whisper, the puppy, warm and full, fell into a deep sleep in the crook of his arm. Elias looked from the tiny, trusting creature to the photograph of Alara on the mantelpiece. For the first time in 2 years, the silence in the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. The ghost in the snow had, in some small way, quieted the ghost in his heart. He had no idea that the tiny life he held, marked by the storm itself, would one day become a storm of its own. The world outside the cabin was reborn in silence. The blizzard scoured the land, leaving behind a pristine, glittering blanket that stretched to the horizon, dazzling under a sharp, cold sun. Inside, a different kind of rebirth was taking place. Elias named him Fun. The name came to him the morning after the rescue, as he watched the small creature clumsily lap warm milk from a shallow bowl. It was an old name, from stories his grandfather used to tell, stories of wild places and cunning spirits of the forest. It fit. This little life, born from the heart of a tempest, felt ancient and new all at once. The first week was a fragile, exhausting dance. Elias, who had grown accustomed to the slow, predictable rhythm of solitude, now found his world revolving around a tiny, demanding ball of gray fur. He woke every few hours through the night to feed Fun, his own sleep sacrificed without a second thought. He fashioned a cozy bed from a cardboard box and an old sweater, placing it near the fireplace. But Fun rarely stayed there. He would whimper until Elias lifted him onto the bed, where he would curl into a tight, warm sphere against the man's side, his tiny body vibrating with contented purr-like rumble that was strangely soothing. It was that sound, more than anything, that began to mend the cracks in Elias's soul. The silence was no longer an absence. It was a space filled with his soft breathing, the click of his tiny claws on the wooden floor, and that peculiar, rumbling purr. Elias talked to him. He hadn't realized how much he missed the sound of his own voice in conversation. He told Fun about his day, about the wood he needed to chop, the tracks he'd seen in the snow, and sometimes in the soft light of the evening, he would tell him about Alara. He would have loved you, Elias said one night. Fun nestled in his lap, gnawing on a piece of rawhide Elias had bought on his last supply trip to town. She had a way with animals. They just trusted her, like you trust me. Fun looked up at the sound of his voice, his eyes now fully open. They were a startling luminous blue, the color glacier ice. They held an intelligence that was unnerving for a creature so young. He seemed to be listening, truly listening to every word. As the days turned into weeks, Fun grew at an astonishing rate. It was more than just a puppy getting bigger. It was a transformation. His smoky gray fur thickened into a dense, double-layered coat that shimmered with silver and charcoal hues. His legs, once clumsy, grew long and powerful. His paws, which had seemed comically large, now promised a creature of immense size. And his features sharpened, the muzzle elongated, the ice-blue eyes slanted slightly, and those pointed ears became more pronounced, constantly swiveling, capturing sounds Elias couldn't even perceive. He was a beautiful animal, but he was unlike any dog Elias had ever seen. There was a primal grace to his movements, a silent, fluid power that made the few deer that wandered near the cabin startle and flee long before Fun made a sound. Their bond deepened into something wordless and profound. Elias taught him simple commands, come, stay, no, but they often felt unnecessary. Fun seemed to understand his intentions before he voiced them. When Elias felt a wave of grief coming on, a dark fog descending, Fun would be there, nudging his hand with his cold nose, resting his heavy head on his knee, his steady presence a silent anchor. One afternoon, Elias decided to venture further into the woods to check his trap line. It was his first long trip since the blizzard, and he was hesitant to leave Fun alone. But the puppy, now the size of a small Labrador, insisted, bouncing at the door, his ice-blue eyes bright with excitement. All right. Elias laughed, buckling on his snowshoes. But you stay close, you hear me? The forest was a cathedral of ice and silence. Sunlight filtered through the snow-laden boughs of the pines, painting the snow with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Fun was a revelation in this environment. He moved through the deep snow with an effortless, bounding gait, his body low to the ground. He didn't bark or yap, like a normal dog. He was utterly silent. A gray ghost flew between the trees. Elias checked his traps. All empty, the mechanisms frozen solid. He was about to turn back when a sudden, piercing cry split the air. A snowshoe hare, startled from its hiding place, burst from under a bush and shot across a clearing. In that instant, Elias saw a switch flip inside Fun. The playful, clumsy puppy vanished. What was left was pure, unadulterated predator. Fun didn't bark. He didn't growl. He dropped into a crouch, his body coiling like a spring. His focus absolute. The air around him seemed to grow cold, and Elias saw a faint plume of mist, not from his panting, but seeming to emanate from his very fur. Then he was gone. He moved with a speed that was breathtaking, a silver blur against the white snow. He wasn't running on the snow. He was flowing over it, his paws barely seeming to touch the surface. He closed the distance to the hare in 3 heartbeats. There was no struggle, no sound. One moment the hare was running. The next, Fun had it. He didn't shake it or maul it. He simply stood over it, then turned and trotted back to Elias, the dead hare held gently in his jaws. He dropped at Elias's feet and looked up, his ice blue eyes clear and expectant, his tail giving a single, slow wag. There was no malice in his gaze, no bloodlust. It was just a fact, a gift. Elias stared down at the perfect unmarked hare, then at the magnificent, terrifying creature he had saved. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from awe. This was no dog. This was something else. Something wild and ancient and powerful. He reached down, his hand trembling slightly, and ruffled the thick fur on Fun's neck. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Fun leaned into the touch, the rumbling purse starting up in his chest. In that moment, surrounded by the silent, watchful trees, Elias felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. He had brought a ghost in from the snow, but he was beginning to understand that he might have brought a part of the storm itself inside his home. Spring came to North Rim not as a gentle thaw, but as a violent, messy argument between winter and life. Snow melted into rushing, icy streams that carved through the forest floor. The air, once sharp and clean, grew thick with the scent of wet earth and waking pine. And Fun, now 5 months old, was no longer a puppy. He was a force of nature. He stood nearly as high as Elias's hip, a solid 120 pounds of coiled muscle and dense fur. His growth was a constant, visible thing. Elias sometimes joked he could actually see the boy getting bigger if he stared long enough. The smoky gray of his coat had darkened to a stormy charcoal, making the jagged white scar on his forehead stand out like a crack of lightning on a dark sky. His ice blue eyes still held that unnerving intelligence, but now there was a new depth to them, a quiet, watchful confidence. Their life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were for patrols. Fun would lead the way, his nose constantly testing the wind, his ears tracking the hidden life of the forest. Elias followed, his own senses heightened by Fun's vigilance. He felt safer with Fun than he ever had with a rifle. The local wildlife seemed to sense a new apex predator in their midst. The bears gave their territory a wide berth, and the coyote packs that used to serenade the night from the ridge had fallen silent. It was on one of these patrols that they had their first encounter with the outside world. Elias needed supplies. His monthly trip to the small, rugged town of Silver Creek, 20 miles down the mountain, could no longer be postponed. The thought of taking Fun filled him with a strange, possessive anxiety. Fun was his secret, his miracle. The idea of exposing him to prying eyes, to questions he couldn't answer, felt like a betrayal. But leaving him alone for a full day was unthinkable. So, with a knot of unease in his stomach, he loaded Fun into the passenger seat of his old beat-up pickup truck. Fun was fascinated by the vehicle. He pressed his nose against the window, his breath fogging the glass, watching the world fly by in a blur of green and brown. He was calm, composed. Too composed, Elias thought. A normal dog would be panting, whining, excited. Fun was just observing. Silver Creek was a handful of weathered buildings clinging to the side of the highway, a general store, a gas station, a diner. As Elias pulled up outside Miller's general store, he turned to Fun. "Stay," he commanded, his voice firm. "And be quiet. Understand." Fun looked at him, blinked his blue eyes slowly, and settled down on the seat, his head on his paws. He looked like a statue. Elias took a deep breath and stepped out, the bell above the door jangling as he entered. The store was his familiar self, a dim, cluttered space smelling of coffee, leather, and dust. Old Man Miller was behind the counter, and a couple local ranchers, Dan and Roy, were leaning against it, nursing coffees. Elias, Miller nodded. Haven't seen you in a spell. Heard the blizzard was a bad one up your way. It was, Elias said, grabbing a cart and starting to load it with canned goods, flour, and ammunition. Survived all right, though. Dan asked. Always do, Elias replied, his tone short. He wanted to get this over with. It was Roy who noticed. He squinted through the grimy store window. Hey, Elias, that your dog in the truck. Elias's blood ran cold. He forced himself to keep stacking cans. Yeah, Lord above, Roy whistled. What kind of breed is that? Never seen anything like it. Looks part wolf, part, I don't know what. He's a mutt, Elias said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. Dan joined Roy at the window. A mutt? That's no mutt. Look at the size of him. And the color. And those eyes. He's looking right at me. Gives me the damn creeps. A low sound, so deep it was almost a vibration, began to emanate from the truck. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. It was a subsonic hum. The sound a power line makes, a promise of immense energy held in check. The glass of the truck's window began to fog not from the inside, but from the outside, a delicate tracery of frost spreading from the bottom up, as if the very air around the vehicle was growing cold. The three men inside the store fell silent. The only sound was a hum from the truck and the slow drip of the coffee machine. He doesn't like people staring, Elias said quietly. Roy took a step back from the window, a superstitious fear flashing in his eyes. What in God's name have you got there, Elias? Just then, a group of teenagers, loud and boisterous, spilled out of the diner across the street. One of them, a lanky boy, spotted foot in the truck. He pointed and yelled something to his friends, and they all started walking over, their voices carrying through quiet street. Hey, check out the wolf dog, one shouted. Finn didn't move. He didn't bark, but his ice blue eyes tracked the approaching boys with the cold, dispassionate focus of a hawk tracking a mouse. The frost on the window thickened, crawling towards the top of the glass. The low hum deepened in pitch. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped a can of beans into his cart with a loud clatter. I have to go. He hurried to the counter, throwing down cash, not waiting for his change. Keep it, Miller. He rushed out of the store, the bell jangling wildly behind him. The teenagers were just a few feet from his truck, the lanky one reaching out a hand to tap on the window. Don't! Elias barked, his voice cracking with fear. He didn't try to hide. The boy froze, startled. Elias yanked the driver's door open and slid inside, slamming it shut. The interior of the cab was cold, unnaturally so. Finn was still in the exact same position, but the air around him was frigid. Easy, boy, Elias whispered, putting a hand on his flank. Easy, we're leaving. He started the engine and pulled away, his tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror, he saw the group of teenagers and the three men from the store, all standing in a silent, stunned cluster, watching him go. The drive home was tense and quiet. The unnatural cold in the cab slowly dissipated, and Finn's low hum faded away. He rested his head on Elias's leg, his eyes soft again. The shadow had passed, but Elias couldn't shake the image from his mind. The frost creeping up the glass, the terrified look in Roy's eyes, the absolute, terrifying control Finn had exhibited. He had rescued a creature from the snow, but he was beginning to realize he was living with a shadow that could cast its own darkness. The world had seen a glimpse of Finn, and Elias knew, with a sickening certainty, that it would not be the last. The encounter in Silver Creek left a stain on their peaceful existence. A line had been crossed. The outside world, with its questions and its fears, had touched their secret, and the echo of it lingered in the cabin like a bad smell. Elias became more reclusive, his supply trips quicker, his gaze more often turned toward the high, lonely peaks behind his home, as if seeking an escape route. Fun, now 8 months old and larger than any wolf Elias had ever seen in a book, seemed to sense a shift. He became more attached, more protective. He shadowed Elias's every step, a massive, silent presence. His playfulness, once that of a clumsy pup, was now a fearsome display of power. When he wanted Elias to throw a stick, he would bring back a log the size of a man's leg. When he wrestled playfully, his gentle nips could leave bruises through Elias's thick jacket. But it was at night that the change was most profound. It started with the full moon, a huge luminous pearl that washed the mountainscape in an eerie blue-white light. Elias was woken from a deep sleep by a sound that froze the blood in his veins. It was a howl, but it was unlike any howl he had ever heard. It wasn't the yipping chorus of coyotes or the lone, mournful cry of a timber wolf. This was a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the night itself. It was low at first, a resonant hum that made the cabin windows vibrate. Then it rose, soaring into a high, clear, piercing note that was both beautiful and utterly terrifying. It was a song of immense loneliness and ancient power, a sound that belonged to glaciers calving into Arctic seas, and to the wind screaming through forgotten canyons. It was the voice of the storm given form. Elias sat bolt upright in bed, his heart thundering. Fun was not in the room. He scrambled to the window and looked out. Fun stood on the outcropping of rock that overlooked the valley, his silhouette stark against the moon-drenched sky. He was colossal, his head thrown back, his chest expanded as he poured his soul into that unearthly music. The jagged white scar on his forehead seemed to glow with a faint, phosphorescent light. As he howled, a phenomenon occurred that made Elias's jaw drop. The air around him began to shimmer, not with heat, but with a crystalline cold. Tiny, perfect snowflakes began to form out of the moist night air, swirling around him in a miniature, localized blizzard, glittering like diamonds in the moonlight. Elias watched, transfixed and horrified. This was no dog. This was a myth, a legend walking the earth in the skin of his beloved companion. The howl wasn't just a call. It was a declaration. It was for announcing his presence to the sleeping world, and the world itself was responding, frosting over at his command. The howl lasted for a full minute before fading away, leaving a silence that felt deeper and more profound than any Elias had ever known. The shimmering snow dust settled around Fun's paws. He lowered his head, turned, and his ice-blue eyes found Elias in the window. There was no malice there, no wildness. There was only a deep, profound recognition, and something else, a question. Elias stumbled outside, the cold night air biting through his long johns. He walked towards Fun, his bare feet crunching on the frost-kissed grass. He stopped a few feet away, looking up at the magnificent, impossible creature. "Fun," he whispered, his voice shaky. "What are you?" Fun took a step forward and nudged Elias's hand with his massive head, the same gesture he'd used as a tiny puppy. The rumbling purr started in his chest, a sound of pure contentment. He was still Fun. He was still the creature Elias had saved, the companion who slept by his fire. But he was also more. Elias reached out and touched the fur on Fun's neck. It was cold, like the heart of a winter night. "You can't do that, boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can't let them see. They won't understand." He thought of the men in the store, their superstitious fear. He thought of what would happen if someone would rifle her that howl, saw that display of power. They wouldn't see a loyal companion. They would see a monster, a threat to be eliminated. From that night on, the howls became a regular occurrence, always under the blanket of the new moon or the full moon, always answered by that strange, localized frost. Elias stopped trying to sleep through them. He would get up, make tea, and sit by the window, listening to Fun's lonely symphony. It was a sound that scared him, yes, but it also filled him with a strange, aching pride. He was the guardian of a miracle. He was the keeper of a secret that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. Their bond, forged in the quiet moments by the fire and tested by the fear in town, was now tempered in the crucible of this new, moonlit reality. Elias knew, with a certainty that was as cold as the air around him when he howled, that their peaceful isolation was a fragile thing. The world was vast, and it had ears. Someone, somewhere, was bound to be listening, and the howl at the edge of their world was a beacon that could lead both wonder and terror to their door. A year, A full cycle of seasons had turned since the blizzard. The deep snows returned, but this time, Elias was not alone in his cabin. He shared it with a legend, a brother, a son, from was now a year old, a titan of a creature. He stood taller than Elias's waist, a solid 180 pounds of primal muscle and winter-thick fur. When he ran, the earth seemed to tremble. When he looked at you with those glacier blue eyes, you felt seen in a way that was both comforting and profoundly disconcerting. The howling had continued. A monthly ritual Elias had come to accept as part of the fabric of his life. He'd even started to find a strange comfort in it. A reminder of the incredible, impossible nature of the bond they shared. He was no longer just a grieving man. He was a guardian of a mystery. But mysteries have a way of demanding to be solved. It was a crisp, bright afternoon. The sun was a weak, wintry gold, and the snow was deep and pristine. Elias was splitting logs with a fire, the rhythmic thwack of the axe a satisfying sound in the quiet clearing. Finn was nearby, rolling in a deep snowdrift, kicking his powerful legs in the air like an overgrown pup. The scene was one of perfect, domestic peace. The axe was in mid-swing when a sound shattered the silence. Not a natural sound, not the cry of an eagle or the wind in the pines. It was a high, mechanical whine of a snowmobile. Several of them. Elias froze, the axe hovering in the air. Finn was on his feet in an instant, his playfulness gone, replaced by the lethal stillness of a predator. His head was up, ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the tree line where the sound was coming from. A low, dangerous rumble started deep in his chest, a sound that promised violence, not a warning. From inside, Elias commanded, his voice tight. Finn didn't move. His focus was absolute. The snowmobiles burst from the trees, 3 of them, roaring into the clearing and skidding to a halt in a spray of snow. The men who dismounted were not like the curious ranchers from Silver Creek. These men were hard-edged, dressed in expensive, technical cold-weather gear. 2 of them carried high-powered rifles slung over their shoulders. The third, a man with a sharp, predatory face and cold eyes, held a high-resolution camera with a long lens. He was the one who spoke. Elias Vance? Elias lowered the axe, keeping a firm grip on the handle. This is private property. You're trespassing. The man with the camera smiled, a thin, humorless stretch of his lips. My apologies. The name is Dr. Aristhorn. He gestured to the armed men. My associates. We're from a Northern Hemisphere cryptozoological society. Elias's blood ran cold. Cryptozoology, the study of hidden mythical animals. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and apparently whatever Finn was. We heard some fascinating stories in a little town called Silver Creek. Thorne continued, his eyes sliding past Elias and locking onto Finn. His smile widened. And my God, the stories didn't do him justice. Finn took a single step forward, placing his massive body between Elias and the intruders. The rumble in his chest grew louder. The air around him began to grow cold. Elias could see it, a visible shimmer, like heat haze off asphalt, but it was a wave of intense cold. The snow at Finn's feet began to crisp and harden. The 2 armed men unslung their rifles, their movements practiced and calm. Call him off, mister. One of them said, his voice steady. Fun, no. Elias shouted, his heart in his throat. He dropped the axe and grabbed Finn by the scruff of his neck, a futile gesture. It was like trying to hold back a mountain. Stay. Thorne seemed utterly unafraid. He was mesmerized. He raised his camera and began snapping pictures, the shutter clicking rapidly. Look at him. The size. The coat. The cephalic structure is completely unique. And that mark on his forehead. Is that a natural marking? It looks like a scar. Get off my land, Elias snarled, his fear turning to rage. We don't want to hurt him, Mr. Vance, Thorne said, lowering his camera slightly. We want to study him, to understand him. A creature like this, it belongs to the world, not to one man hiding in the woods. He belongs to no one, Elias yelled. In that moment, Finn had had enough. The invasion of his territory, the threat to his human, the blinding flash of the camera, it was too much. The low rumble erupted into a full, thunderous roar. It was a sound of pure, elemental fury, a sound that should have come from a saber-toothed tiger or a cave bear. It was deafening. As he roared, the cold emanating from him intensified explosively. The moisture in the air flash froze, not into gentle snowflakes, but into a blast of needle-sharp ice crystals that shot outwards in a blinding cloud. The men cried out, shielding their faces. The lenses of their goggles and Thorne's camera were instantly coated in a thick, opaque rime of frost. "Jesus Christ," one of the armed men shouted, stumbling backward and frantically wiping his goggles. In the confusion, Elias saw his chance. "Fun with me? Now!" He turned and ran for the cabin. Fun, with one last, searing glare at the disoriented men, turned and bounded after him, a gray streak of fury. They slammed the heavy wooden door shut, and Elias threw the bolt, his hand shaking so badly he could barely manage it. Outside, he heard Thorne's voice, not angry, but filled with a terrifying, fanatical excitement. "Did you see that? The cryokinesis. It's real. All of it is real." The snowmobiles started up again, but they didn't leave immediately. They circled the clearing once, twice, as if marking the territory, claiming it. Then, the sound of their engines faded back into the trees. Elias slid down the door, his legs giving way. He sat on the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Finn stood over him, panting, his body still vibrating with adrenaline and rage. He nudged Elias's face, whining softly, a stark contrast to the terrifying roar of moments before. Elias wrapped his arms around the great beast's neck, burying his face in the cold, thick fur. They were safe. For now. But the secret was out. The world hadn't just glimpsed Finn this time. It had been given a demonstration. And the man who had seen it wasn't a superstitious rancher. He was a hunter of myths, and he had looked upon Finn not with fear, but with greed. He had seen a prize, a specimen. The storm that had brought them together was over. But Elias knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that a different kind of storm was just beginning. A storm of men. And this was one he couldn't fight with an axe or hide from in his cabin. The mark of the storm on Finn's forehead was no longer just a scar. It was a target. The silence after the snowmobiles left was heavier than any Elias had ever known. It was a watchful, pregnant silence, broken only by the frantic beating of his own heart and Finn's low, continuous growl, a sound like grinding stones. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The windows were eyes. The walls were paper thin. He forced himself to his feet, his legs trembling. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're gone." But were they? He crept to the window, peering through a crack in the heavy curtains. The clearing was empty, scarred only by the tracks of the snowmobiles. The perfect white canvas was ruined. He saw the spot where it had unleashed his power, a patch of snow glazed into a sheet of solid, milky ice, the frozen shards of his breath glittering around it like shattered glass. It was undeniable proof. Finn pressed against his side, a solid, trembling wall of muscle and fur. Elias laid a hand on his head, his fingers tracing the familiar jagged white scar. "What did you do, Finn?" he murmured, not in accusation, but in awe. "Were you—" He had no answers, only a cold, creeping dread. Dr. Eris Thorne was not a man who would be deterred by a show of force. He was a fanatic, and fanatics did not give up. For the next 2 days, they lived in a state of high alert. Elias slept fitfully, a loaded rifle by his bed, from a watchful sentinel at the door. Every creak of the cabin settling, every snap of a frozen branch outside, sent his heart into his throat. He and Finn patrolled the perimeter of his land constantly, but the vast wilderness that had once been his shield now felt like it was hiding 1,000 unseen enemies. On the 3rd day, Elias saw it, a glint of sunlight on glass, high on the opposite ridge, nearly 2 miles away, a surveillance post. They were being watched, studied. The siege had begun. It was a siege of silence, of psychological warfare. Elias felt his sanity beginning to fray at the edges. The constant, unseen observation was a violation worse than a direct confrontation. He stopped going outside unless it was absolutely necessary. The cabin grew stuffy, the air thick with tension. Finn felt it too. He was restless. pacing the length of main room for hours, his great head low, his ice-blue eyes burning with a caged fury. The playful, rumbling purr was gone, replaced by that subsonic hum of contained power. Elias tried to maintain their routine. He tried to read, to whittle, to do anything to keep his mind occupied, but his focus was shattered. He would find himself staring into the fire for an hour at a time, jumping at the sound of his own heartbeat. The breaking point came when he went to his icebox and found it nearly empty. He had to go to town. The thought filled him with a cold terror. Leaving Finn alone was unthinkable. Taking him was even worse. Thorne's men could be waiting on the road. They could follow him back. They could ambush the cabin while he was gone. That evening, as he sat by the fire, head in his hands, he felt Finn's cold nose nudge his elbow. He looked up into those intelligent, understanding eyes. Finn whined softly, then laid his massive head in Elias's lap, a gesture of pure, simple comfort. He was sharing the burden of this fear. "It's just you and me, isn't it, boy?" Elias said, his voice cracking, "against the whole damn world." Finn's tail gave a single, soft thump against the floor. In that moment, Elias made a decision. He would not be driven from his home. He would not live like a prisoner. And he would not let them take Finn. This cabin, this land, was theirs. It was the place where a broken man had been made whole again by a creature of winter. He would defend it to his last breath. He stood up, a new resolve hardening his features. He went to his gun cabinet. He took out his grandfather's old but well-maintained .30-06 Springfield rifle. He cleaned it meticulously, the familiar, rhythmic motions calming his nerves. He checked his ammunition. He packed a backpack with essentials: food, water, a first aid kit, extra rounds. He looked at Finn. "They're not taking you," he said, his voice low and steady. "Do you understand? No matter what happens." Finn stood up, his head held high. He seemed to grow larger in the dim firelight, his presence filling the room. He let out a soft chuff of air, a sound of agreement, of readiness. The fear in the cabin was still there, but it was now joined by something else. A fierce, unyielding determination. The silence outside was no longer just a threat. It was the calm before the storm. And this time, Elias and Finn would be ready for it. The decision to fight back changed everything. The oppressive weight of being watched didn't vanish, but was transformed into a sharp, focused energy. Elias was no longer a victim waiting for the blow to fall. He was a soldier preparing his defenses, and his greatest weapon was Finn. Their bond had always been deep, a language of looks and touch and shared silence. But now, under the threat of invasion, it evolved into something else. A tactical, wordless understanding. They began to practice. Elias started with the basics of guerrilla warfare, adapted for a man and a myth. He used hand signals. A flat hand, push down, get low, a fist clenched, stop, a finger pointed, then two fingers swipe forward. Go that way, flank them. Finn learned with an unnerving speed. His intelligence wasn't just that of a smart dog. It was strategic, analytical. He understood the why behind the commands, not just the what. One afternoon, Elias decided to test their new skills. He took a piece of his own worn-out flannel shirt and let Finn sniff it deeply. "Find the threat, Finn," he whispered. "Search." He then circled far around the back of the cabin, doing his best to hide his tracks, and crouched behind a thick cluster of pines and boulders, playing the part of an intruder. He waited, his rifle ready, his heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. For a full 5 minutes, there was nothing, only the sigh of the wind. Then, a flicker of movement in the periphery of his vision. He turned his head slowly. Nothing. He scanned the trees, the snowdrifts. Still nothing. A cold puff of air tickled the back of his neck. Elias jumped, spinning around and almost dropping his rifle. Finn was there, right behind him. He hadn't approached from the front or the sides. He had come from directly upwind, moving from shadow to shadow in impossible silence, using the terrain and the sound of the breeze to mask his approach. His ice-blue eyes gleamed with what could only be described as satisfaction. He hadn't just found Elias. He had proven he could get close enough to touch him without being detected. Good God! Elias breathed, a laugh of pure astonishment escaping his lips. He ruffled the thick fur on Fun's neck. "You're a ghost." They practiced ambushes. Elias would hide, and Fun would use his natural camouflage and preternatural stealth to get into position. They practiced distractions. Elias would make a noise in one direction, and Fun would create a much larger, more terrifying commotion, a sudden, thunderous roar, the sound of a large tree branch being shattered from the opposite side. But the most chilling and most effective practice involved Fun's abilities. Elias discovered that Fun's control over cold was not just a defensive blast. He could focus it. One evening, as the temperature plummeted, Elias pointed to the metal latch on the woodshed door. "There, Fun. Just there. Freeze it." Fun narrowed his eyes, his concentration absolute. He didn't roar or growl. He simply stared. A faint, visible stream of cold air, like a ghostly breath, shot from his nostrils and settled on the latch. Elias heard a sharp crack as the moisture in the mechanism instantly froze solid, sealing it shut. He tried the door. It was jammed fast. A slow, grim smile spread across Elias's face. He could disable vehicles, freeze gun mechanisms, create impromptu ice barriers. They were no longer just a man and his dog. They were a partnership. Elias was the mind, the planner. Fun was the heart, the unstoppable, primal force. This new understanding bled into their quiet moments, deepening their connection in ways Elias could never have imagined. One night, as they sat by the fire, Elias felt a wave of his old grief for Alara surface. It was a sharp, sudden pain, a longing for the life that was stolen from him. He didn't cry. He just stared into the flames, the emptiness opening up inside him once more. Fun, who had been sleeping by the hearth, lifted his head. He didn't come over and nudge him. Instead, he looked at the fire, and as Elias watched, the flames, which had been leaping and dancing, suddenly stilled and shrank, as if the very air feeding them had been chilled. The room grew dimmer, the shadows longer. It wasn't a threatening cold. It was a somber, respectful one, a cold that mirrored the ice in Elias's own heart. Fun then looked at Elias, and the cold receded, the flames slowly returning to their normal height. He had understood. He had shared the feeling. He had spoken a language deeper than words, a language of the wild, of elemental forces, of a shared soul. Elias looked at the magnificent creature, this gift from the storm, and knew there was no going back. He would burn the whole world down for Fun. He would kill for him. He would die for him. The line between man and beast, between natural and supernatural, had not just blurred, it had vanished. They were one, and anyone who tried to come between them would learn the terrible, beautiful language of their bond, a language written in ice and blood. The confrontation came not with shout, but with a silent, deadly patience of the hunt. Elias had been tracking the surveillance team on the opposite ridge for days, using Fun's superior senses to map their patterns. There were 2 of them, and they switched shifts at midnight. For a precious 15 minutes during that switch, the ridge was unobserved. It was time. A new moon hung in the sky, a sliver of silver in an ink-black canvas, offering just enough light to see by. Elias and Fun moved like wraiths through the sleeping forest. Elias was clad in dark clothing, his face smudged with charcoal. Fun was a deeper shadow at his side, his paws making no sound on the snow-packed trail. They had become a single entity, a creature of vengeance and protection. They reached the base of the ridge. Elias gave the hand signal for silence and ascent. Fun melted into the trees, choosing a path that was sheer and treacherous, impossible for a human. Elias took the longer, more gradual route, his heart a drum in his chest. He reached the top, flattening himself behind a fallen log. Through a gap in the branches, he could see the small, domed observation tent, its dark fabric making it almost invisible. A single, dim light glowed from within. As predicted, the 2 men were there, one packing his gear to leave, the other sipping coffee from a thermos, preparing for his watch. Elias's plan was simple: sabotage, disable their equipment, their snowmobiles, and slip back into the night with a clear, unequivocal message: leave. Now, but plans are fragile things. He was about to signal Fun to move towards the snowmobiles when the man with the thermos stood up and stretched. He walked to the edge of the ridge, unzipped his pants, and began to relieve himself, his stream arcing into the darkness below. And then he froze, his head cocked. He was looking directly down at the spot where Elias was hidden. "Hey!" the man said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "I think there's something down there." He fumbled for the high-powered flashlight on his belt and clicked it on. The beam, blindingly bright, swept down and pinned Elias behind the log. "Shit, it's him, the hermit!" the man yelled, dropping his thermos and reaching for the pistol at his hip. Everything happened at once. Elias rolled away from the log, bringing his rifle up, but before he could even find his target, a sound erupted from the trees to his left, the full, earth-shaking roar of a creature born of fury. It was a sound to stop hearts. Fun erupted from the darkness. He didn't target the man with the flashlight. He went for the other one, the one still inside the tent who was frantically trying to unsling his rifle. Fun hit him like a freight train made of winter and rage. The tent collapsed around them in a tangle of fabric and poles. There was a scream, cut horrifically short, followed by the sound of tearing and a single, sickening crunch. The man with the flashlight stood paralyzed, his pistol half-raised, his face a mask of sheer, primal terror. He stared at the writhing, roaring mass that had been his partner. Then at Elias, who was now on his feet, the rifle aimed squarely at his chest. "Don't move," Elias snarled, his voice trembling with adrenaline. But the man's survival instinct overrode his fear. He swung his pistol toward Elias. A blur of gray, a blast of Arctic air. Fun was on him before his finger could even touch the trigger. He moved with such speed he was just an impression of teeth and shadow and freezing mist. The man screamed as Fun's jaws closed around his arm. The sound of breaking bone was loud and crisp. The pistol clattered to the ground. Fun didn't kill him. He stood over the sobbing, terrified man, his muzzle stained dark, his breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air. He was a demon from a frozen hell, and his ice-blue eyes promised that death was only a heartbeat away. "Fun, enough!" Elias shouted, his stomach churning. Fun took a step back, but his gaze never left the wounded man. A low, continuous growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the ground. Elias approached, his rifle still trained on the man. He looked at the destroyed tent, at the dark, spreading stains seeping through the fabric. His vision swam. He had known this was a possibility, but the reality of it, the coppery smell of blood, the finality of that crunch, was visceral and horrifying. He looked at the surviving man, who was clutching his mangled arm, weeping in pain and terror. "Listen to me," Elias said, his voice low and deadly. "You go back to Thorn. You tell him what you saw. You tell him that this is my land. That Fun is under my protection. The next time he sends anyone, I won't call him off. Do you understand?" The man could only nod, his eyes wide with shock. "Now get out of here." Elias spat. "Walk, and pray you don't freeze to death before you find your people." The man scrambled to his feet, stumbling and falling down the far side of the ridge, his cries of pain fading into the night. Elias stood alone on the ridge, the wind cold on his face. He looked at Fun, who was now calmly licking the blood from his jaws. The creature looked back at him, and for a terrifying second, Elias saw not his loyal companion, but the ancient, ruthless predator he truly was, the one who had killed without hesitation to protect him. The first blood had been spilled. There was no undoing it. The line had been crossed. They were no longer just defenders. They were killers. And as Elias turned to lead Fun back into the welcoming darkness of their forest, he knew, with a stone-cold certainty, that this was only the beginning. The walk back to the cabin was a funeral procession for Elias's innocence. The adrenaline that had fueled him on the ridge drained away, leaving behind a cold, heavy sludge of guilt and horror. He could still smell the blood. He could still hear the crunch of bone, the gurgled scream cut short. He saw it every time he blinked. Fun, a vortex of destruction, and the dark stains spreading on the tent fabric. Fun, by contrast, seemed calm, almost serene. He walked close to Elias, his head lowered, occasionally nudging Elias's hand with his cold nose, as if asking why the mood had soured. For him, it was simple. A threat had appeared. The threat had been eliminated. The pack was safe. There was no moral ambiguity. in the world of tooth and claw. Back inside the cabin, Elias bolted the door and leaned against it, sliding to the floor. He buried his face in his hands. He had fired his rifle in anger for the first time in his life. He had been an accomplice to murder. The man Finn had killed. Did he have a family? A wife? Children? The questions were a swarm of stinging insects in his mind. God, what have we done, Finn? He whispered into the silence. Finn whined softly and lay down beside him, resting his massive head on Elias's knee. His ice-blue eyes were soft, concerned. The contrast between this gentle giant and the raging beast on a ridge was utterly disorienting. Elias reached out a trembling hand and touched Finn's head, his fingers finding the familiar jagged scar. This was his fault. He had brought this creature into his life. He had nurtured it, loved it, and in doing so, he had unleashed a power he could never hope to control. He had thought he was a guardian, but now he felt like a fool, a man who had lit a fuse on a powder keg and was now surprised by the explosion. The following days were dark. Elias barely ate. He slept in fits and starts, his dreams filled with blood and screaming and the sound of tearing fabric. He jumped at every sound. The cabin, his sanctuary, now felt tainted. The peace was gone, replaced by the ghost of the man they had killed. He started looking at Finn differently. The immense power he had once marveled at now seemed monstrous. The low rumble of Finn's purr, once a comfort, now sounded like the idle of a deadly engine. When Finn would playfully paw at him, Elias would flinch, remembering the power in those paws that could shatter bone. Finn sensed a change. He became subdued, confused. He would lie by the fire, watching Elias with a sad, questioning look in his eyes. He didn't understand this new distance, this coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. He had done everything right. He had protected his human. Why was his human now afraid of him? The breaking point came 3 days after the incident on the ridge. Elias was trying to fix a loose hinge on the cupboard, his hands shaking so badly he kept dropping the screws. Frustration and self-loathing boiled over. He slammed his fist against the wall with a choked cry. Finn, startled by the sudden noise and the burst of anger, reacted instinctively. He backed away, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Not a threat, but a warning, a nervous reaction. Elias spun around. "Don't you growl at me," he shouted, his voice raw with pain and fury. "Don't you dare, after what you did." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Finn flinched as if struck. The growl cut off. He looked at Elias, and the intelligence in his eyes was now filled with profound, human-like hurt. He let out a soft, wounded whimper, turned and slunk to the farthest corner of the cabin, where he lay down, turning his back to Elias. The sight was a physical blow to Elias's heart. The wound wasn't on the ridge. The real wound was here, in this room, festering between them. He was pushing away the only being who had ever truly understood him, the creature he had sworn to protect. He was punishing Finn for being what he was, for doing what came naturally to protect their home. He had been so consumed by his own guilt that he had failed to see Finn's confusion and pain. The bond, their greatest strength, was cracking. Elias crossed the room and sat on the floor a few feet from Finn. He didn't reach out. He just sat there in the silence he had created. "I'm sorry, boy," he said softly, his voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at myself. I'm scared." Finn's ear twitched, but he didn't turn around. "I asked you to be a part of my world," Elias continued, "but I never learned to be a part of yours. You were just protecting me, and I thank you with fear." He sat there for a long time, until the fire burned low. Finally, with a deep sigh, Finn slowly turned his head. His ice-blue eyes met Elias's. The hurt was still there, but so was the old, deep love. Elias slowly reached out his hand. Finn hesitated for a moment, then stretched his neck and nudged Elias's palm with his cold nose. The touch was an absolution. The wound wasn't healed. It was too deep for that. But the bleeding had stopped. They had faced the outside world and spilled blood. Now, they had faced the enemy within, the fear, the guilt, the doubt, and had found their way back to each other. The bond was scarred, but it was stronger for it. They were ready for the war they both knew was coming. A fragile, New normal settled over the cabin. The guilt did not vanish, but Elias made a conscious choice to lock it away in a deep chamber of his heart. To dwell on it was a luxury they could not afford. It was a poison that would weaken them both. And in the war that was coming, weakness was death. The message they had sent from the ridge was received. The glint of glass from the opposite peak vanished and did not return. The woods were silent, devoid of the mechanical whine of snowmobiles. But it was not a peace. It was a gathering, a drawing of breath. Elias could feel it in his bones, the pressure building before a hurricane makes landfall. Thorne was not a man who would be scared off by one display of force. He was regrouping, planning. The next time he came, it would not be with a two-man observation team. This lull, this false calm became their academy. Their training intensified, evolving from simple maneuvers into a complex, deadly ballet. They were no longer just learning to work together. They were merging into a single, cohesive fighting unit. Elias focused on Finn's unique abilities, honing them into precise tools. He discovered that Finn's control over cold was linked to his emotional state and his focus. Rage produced a wide, destructive blast, but a calm, sharp concentration could yield surgical results. They practiced on a rusted old truck engine block Elias had dragged into the clearing. The fuel line from Elias would instruct, pointing. Just a fuel line. Finn would stare, his body still, his breath a visible stream in the cold air. A thin tendril of frost would snake out, coiling around a specific metal pipe. Elias would tap it with a wrench, and it would shatter, brittle as glass. Good. Now the ignition wires. Day by day, Finn's control grew more refined. He could flash freeze a puddle into a slick sheet of black ice exactly where Elias pointed. He coat a section of the cabin's metal roof in a thick layer of rime, making it impossible to climb. He could even, Elias discovered with a shock, lower his own body temperature to such a degree that he became almost invisible to thermal imaging, a perfect ghost in the winter landscape. In return, Finn taught Elias the language of the wild in a way he had never understood it. He taught him to read the forest not just with his eyes, but with his entire being, to feel the subtle shift in the wind that signaled a change in weather hours before it arrived, to interpret the alarm calls of birds not as random noise, but as a detailed map of movement through the trees, to understand that silence itself could be a warning. Their connection became telepathic. Elias would think of a maneuver, and would already be moving to execute it. He would feel a prickle of unease on the back of his neck, and a glance of him would confirm the creature had sensed an intrusion miles away. They shared a single awareness, a single purpose. One evening, as they shared a meal of venison stew, Elias at the table, Finn with his own large bowl on the floor, Elias looked at the magnificent creature and felt a love so fierce it was painful. It was different from the love he had for Alara, that had been a love of partnership, of a shared future. This was a love of essence, of a fused soul. He would die for Finn, yes, but more than that, he would live for him. He would become the man Finn believed him to be, strong, fearless, unwavering. The world is coming for you, boy, Elias said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. They see you as a monster, a thing to be captured, put in a cage, and studied. Finn looked up from his bowl, his eyes meeting Elias's. He gave a soft chuff, as if to say, let them try. But they're wrong, Elias continued, a hard edge coming into his voice. You're not a monster. You're a king of this mountain, and this is your kingdom. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, silent forest. And I am your sworn sword, until the end. He felt Finn come to stand beside him, his massive shoulder pressing against Elias's leg. Together, they watched the night. The calm was a lie, a beautiful, terrible lie, but they were ready to shatter it. The world thought it was hunting a beast. It had no idea it was marching to war against a king and his guardian, a force of nature forged in blizzard and blood, waiting patiently in the heart of the storm. The silence lasted for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of heightened senses, of jumping at the fall of the pine cone, of dreaming of mechanical whines in the night. The peace was a taut wire, stretched to its breaking point. Elias and Finn used the time, their bond now a tempered steel, their strategies refined instinct. But a new kind of fear began to gnaw at Elias. Not a confrontation, but of the unknown. What was Thorn planning? The answer came on a morning shrouded in a thick, freezing fog. Elias was splitting wood when he heard it. Not the roar of a snowmobile, but a low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that grew steadily louder. It was a sound that didn't belong in his wilderness. A helicopter. His blood ran cold. He dropped the axe. Fun. To me. Fun was at his side in an instant, his head raised, ears swiveling, pinpointing the source of the noise. The thump-thump-thump became a deafening roar as a black, unmarked helicopter emerged from the fog, hovering over the clearing like a monstrous mechanical insect. The downdraft from its blades whipped the snow into a blinding frenzy. Elias shielded his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. No more subtlety. Thorn was coming with everything he had. A voice amplified and distorted by a loudspeaker boomed from the helicopter. Elias Vance, this is Dr. Eris Thorn. You are harboring a dangerous, unclassified organism. Stand down and surrender the creature, and no harm will come to you. Go to hell. Elias screamed into the wind, his voice lost in the rotor wash. The side door of the helicopter slid open. Elias saw figures inside, and then he saw something else. 3 canisters were pushed out, falling towards a clearing. They hit the snow with soft thumps, and immediately began spewing thick, billowing clouds of gray gas. Tranquilizer gas. They weren't here to kill. They were here to capture. Fun the trees. Elias yelled, pulling his scarf over his nose and mouth. But Finn didn't run. He stood his ground, a low, furious growl building in his chest. As the gas began to roll toward them, Finn took a deep breath and exhaled. It wasn't a roar, but a directed, gale-force wind impossibly cold. The wave of freezing air hit the billowing gas, and a miraculous thing happened. The gas particles, heavy with moisture, flash froze. The gray cloud turned into a shower of tiny, frozen pellets that pattered harmlessly to the ground like sleet. From the helicopter, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, Thorn's voice returned, crackling with excitement. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Observe the cryokinetic manipulation. The helicopter shifted, and a figure rappelled down on a line. Then another, and another. 6 men, clad in black tactical gear and gas masks, hit the snow. They moved with a disciplined, military precision, fanning out. They didn't carry ordinary rifles. They carried large-bore tranquilizer dart guns and what looked like heavy nets with metallic filaments woven through them, electrified nets. Elias raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a dart zipped past his head, embedding itself in a tree trunk with a sickening thwack. They were shooting to incapacitate him. Flanking maneuver. Delta pattern, one of the masked men barked. They were trying to separate him from Fun. 2 men moved to Elias's left, 2 to the right, trying to draw his fire, while the remaining 2 focused on Fun, firing heavy-duty tranquilizer darts. Fun moved like liquid shadow. He dodged the first dart, then the second. As a third was fired, he unleashed a focused blast of cold. The dart, a plastic tube filled with liquid, froze solid in midair and shattered against a tree. Elias fired a warning shot over the head of the advancing men. This is your last chance. Get off my land. One of the men near Fun threw the electrified net. It unfurled in a wide arc, crackling with blue energy. Fun saw it coming. He didn't try to outrun it. Instead, he leaped towards it and at the last possible second, twisted his body in midair, a move of impossible agility. His claws, sharp as talons, snagged the net. As he landed, he gave a powerful shake, sending a jolt of electricity, grounding harmlessly through his body into the earth, and hurled a tangled net back at the men, forcing them to dive for cover. Elias used a distraction. He sighted one of the men aiming a dart gun at Fun and fired. He aimed for the weapon. The shot was true. The dart gun flew from the man's hands, shattered. The firefight was a chaotic ballet of dart, bullet, and elemental power. Elias was a ghost, using the trees for cover, his every move mirrored and amplified by Fun. When Elias reloaded, from a creative diversion, a sudden, roaring blast of sound and ice that made the tactical team flinch. When the team focused on Fun, Elias would pick off their equipment, disabling them one by one. He was a good shot, but he couldn't bring himself to aim for flesh. He was a hunter, not a soldier. These men, he realized, were just hired hands. It was Thorn he wanted. He looked up at the hovering helicopter, at the figure he knew was Thorn, watching from above like a god conducting an experiment. Rage, pure and hot, flooded Elias's veins. He raised his rifle, not at the men on the ground, but at the helicopter's cockpit. He never got the shot off. A high-pitched whine, different from the rotor, filled the air. From a pod mounted on the helicopter skid, a large, missile-like projectile shot out. It wasn't explosive. It was a high-tensile polymer cable with weighted anchors on both ends. It spun through the air towards Fun with unerring accuracy. "Fun, look out!" Elias screamed. Fun was busy dodging 2 more darts. He turned, but it was too late. The cable wrapped around his hind legs and torso, the anchors locking together with a loud clack. Fun roared in surprise and fury. Stumbling, he tried to blast it with cold, but the polymer was designed to withstand extreme temperatures. He tried to bite it, but his teeth couldn't get purchase. The more he struggled, the tighter it constricted. The tactical team saw their opening. They moved in, more dart guns raised. Elias saw red. All hesitation vanished. He stood up from behind his cover, firing his rifle not at their weapons, but at their legs. One man cried out and fell. Another took a round in the thigh. The others scattered, their disciplined formation breaking. But it was too late. A large caliber tranquilizer dart, fired from the helicopter itself, found its mark. It slammed into Fun's shoulder. Fun let out a roar of betrayal and confusion. He shook his massive head, his ice blue eyes finding Elias's. The look in them was one of pain, and worse, of fading comprehension. He took a stumbling step towards Elias, then another. His legs buckled. The powerful tranquilizer, enough to drop a bull elephant, was coursing through his veins. He collapsed into the snow, his great body sending up a plume of white powder. The low, subsonic hum that was a soundtrack to Elias's life sputtered and died. The world went silent, save for the relentless thump-thump-thump of the helicopter. The ghost in the machine had won. Elias stood frozen, his rifle hanging limply at his side, watching as the black-clad figures cautiously approached his fallen king. He had failed. The world came back to Fun in a nauseating swirl of chemical fog and disorientation. The first thing he registered was the smell. It was wrong. It was a scent of sterile metal, of harsh antiseptic, of unwashed humans, and underlying all, the flat, dead taste of recycled air. It was the utter absence of pine, of cold earth, of home. He tried to stand, but his limbs were heavy, uncooperative. A sharp, metallic clang echoed in the small space as he bumped against a wall. He opened his eyes. The light was a steady, unforgiving fluorescent hum from above, hurting his light-sensitive eyes. He was in a cage. It wasn't a kennel. It was a prison cell about 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of smooth brushed steel. A heavy, transparent wall of thick plexiglass made up the front, giving him a view of a larger, sterile laboratory. There were no bars to bend, no weaknesses to exploit. In the center of the room was a drain, and in the corner, a tray of raw meat and a bowl of water. The indignity of it made a fresh wave of fury cut through the drug-induced haze. He remembered the fight, the flying machine, the sting in his shoulder, the look on Elias's face as the world went dark. Elias, where was his human? Was he hurt? Was he in a cage like this? A low, panicked whine escaped his throat. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling. He walked to the plexiglass and placed a massive paw against it. It was cold and unyielding. He could see his reflection, a magnificent, terrified beast, the jagged white scar on his forehead a stark brand of his wild origins. He threw his weight against the transparent wall. It didn't even shudder. He backed up and charged, slamming his shoulder into it with a force that would have splintered an oak tree. The impact sent a jarring pain through his body, but the wall held. He did it again, and again. The only result was a loud, mocking boom that echoed in his sterile prison. Frustration and fear boiled over into raw power. He reared back, filled his lungs, and unleashed his roar. The sound, which had once shaken the foundations of the forest, was contained, muffled by the acoustics of the room. It was a roar of protest, a betrayal of a king dethroned. As he roared, his body reacted instinctively. The air around him grew cold. Frost began to spiderweb across the steel walls, creeping towards the ceiling. He focused, pouring his rage and his fear into the cold. He would freeze his way out. He would turn this man-made box into a tomb of ice and shatter it. He heard a click. A faint hissing sound came from vents near the ceiling. A fine, white mist filled the cell. It wasn't gas this time. It was a fire suppressant, a freezing agent designed to counteract extreme heat, but it was also effective against extreme cold. The mist settled on the forming frost, neutralizing it, preventing the temperature from dropping further. They had anticipated this. They had built his prison to contain his winter. The frost receded. Fulin's roar died in his throat, replaced by a shuddering breath. He was panting, exhausted, the drug still in his system. He slumped to the cold floor, the fight temporarily drained from him. This was the cage of man. Not just a physical prison, but a psychological one. It was a place designed to break his spirit, to prove that his power was meaningless against their technology, his will irrelevant to their science. The door to the outer lab opened, and Dr. Eris Thorne walked in, followed by two assistants clutching data pads. Thorne was beaming, his eyes alight with fervent, possessive joy. He walked right up to the plexiglass, completely unafraid. "Magnificent," he breathed, his voice slightly muffled by the barrier. "Even in defeat, you are magnificent. Look at the muscle density, the cranial capacity, the adaptive fur." He turned to his assistants. "Note the subject's reaction to containment. Clear signs of high intelligence and emotional distress. The cryokinetic display was a remarkable survival instinct, effectively neutralized by our environmental controls." Finn lifted his head, his ice-blue eyes locked with Thorne's. He didn't growl. He didn't snarl. He simply looked. And in that look, he conveyed a universe of promise. It was a look that said, "This is not over. When I get out of here, I will remember your face. I will remember your scent. And I will freeze the blood in your veins." Thorne, for the first time, faltered. The clinical excitement in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sliver of primal fear. He took an involuntary step back. "Subject exhibits a startling degree of cognizant threat assessment," he said, his voice less steady. "Fascinating." He turned and walked away, his assistant scurrying after him. The lab door hissed shut. Finn was alone again. The silence was deeper now, more profound. It was a silence of absolute isolation. He laid his head on his paws, staring at the door through which his captor had left. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but was now being forged into something harder, sharper, and more patient. A cold, relentless hatred. He closed his eyes. He didn't think of the steel walls or the neutralizing mist. He thought of the scent of pine on a cold wind. He thought of the crackle of fire in a stone hearth. He thought of Elias's hand on his head, his voice saying, "You're safe now." A new plan began to form, not from rage, but from a deep, calculating intelligence. They thought his power was his only weapon. They were wrong. His mind was a weapon too, and he would use it. He would wait. He would learn. He would find a weakness in their cage of man. And then he would teach them the true meaning of winter. Elias woke up on the floor of his cabin. His head throbbed, and his mouth tasted of blood and dirt. The last thing he remembered was the sight of him falling, the tactical team moving in, and a sharp, blinding pain at the back of his skull. They had knocked him out and left him. A message. The creature is what we want. You are irrelevant. The cabin was a wreck. Overturned furniture, broken glass from a window, the door hanging off its hinges. The silence was a physical weight, crushing him. It was the silence of a heart that had stopped beating. Finn was gone. A sound tore from Elias's throat, a raw, animal cry of grief that echoed in the empty space. He curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. He had failed. He had promised to protect Finn, and he had failed. The bond that had become the core of his existence had been severed, leaving a gaping, bloody wound. He didn't know how long he lay there. Hours, maybe. The weak winter sun moved across the floor, but he didn't feel its warmth. The world had lost all its color, all its meaning. He was back in the silence after Alara's death. But this was worse. This was a living death. As dusk began to fall, a gust of wind blew through the broken door, carrying with a flurry of snow and a deep, penetrating cold. It was a normal mountain cold, but it felt like a mockery. It wasn't Finn's cold. It was just weather. The cold seeped into his bones, and with it, a memory. Finn, as a tiny puppy, shivering in a blanket by this very fireplace. Finn, looking at him with those understanding eyes after he'd spoken of Alara. Finn, standing between him and the armed men, a loyal and terrifying shield. Finn's cold nose nudging his hand in a silent promise. I am your sworn sword, until the end. He had said those words. He had meant them. Was this the end? Lying on the floor, giving up? Was that the legacy he would leave for Finn? A memory of a man who broke when things got hard? A new emotion began to burn through the grief, hot and sharp. Rage. Not the blind rage of the fight, but a cold, focused, and purposeful fury. Thorn hadn't just taken Finn. He had taken his son. He had violated their sanctuary. He had treated a king like a lab rat. Elias pushed himself to his feet. His body ached, but as was a blade being freshly sharpened. He walked to the sink, splashed freezing water on his face, and looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror above it. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but deep within them, a fire had been lit. He was not irrelevant. He righted his table and chair. He spread out a large, detailed topographical map of the North Rim. Thorn would have taken Finn to a secure facility. It wouldn't be in a major city. It would be remote, private, secret. But a place that could house a helicopter and a high-tech lab needed power. Access roads. Secrecy, but not complete isolation. He thought like a hunter. He thought like Finn. He considered the wind, the terrain, the patterns of man. There were only a few possibilities within a certain radius. An old decommissioned military radar station on Blackstone Peak. A private research outpost owned by a shell corporation that had always been a front for government black projects. A biocontainment lab built for studying extreme pathogens, now reportedly mothballed. He packed his backpack with a new, grim determination. Not just supplied for survival, but for war. His rifle, cleaned and oiled, all the ammunition he had. Hunting knife, bolt cutters, his father's old climbing gear, explosives he used for avalanche control. He was no longer just Elias Vance, the hermit. He was a force of vengeance. He was a storm that would answer Finn's call. As he prepared, he felt a strange sensation. It was a pull, a faint, psychic tug at the edge of his consciousness. It felt like a thread, a single silken thread of connection that stretched from his heart out into the world, towards the southeast, towards Blackstone Peak. It was a bond. It wasn't broken. It was strained, stretched to its limit, but it was still there. Finn was alive, and he was calling. He stepped out of the broken cabin, into the twilight. The wind had picked up, and the sky was heavy with the promise of snow. A real storm was coming, a big one. The weather reports were calling it the storm of the decade. Elias looked up at the darkening sky, a grim smile touching his lips. Let it come. Let the tides of winter rise. He would walk in the heart of the blizzard, a ghost in the machine of Thorn's world. They had taken the heart of his winter, and in doing so, they had unleashed the rest of it. He shouldered his pack and started to walk, following the silken thread of the bond, disappearing into the gathering gloom. The rescue was over. This was a reckoning. The storm hit with biblical fury. By the time Elias reached the base of Blackstone Peak, the world had been reduced to a roaring white void. The wind screamed like a banshee, driving horizontal sheets of snow that stung any exposed skin and reduced visibility to mere feet. It was the kind of storm that killed experienced mountaineers. For Elias, it was perfect cover. The thread of the bond was stronger here, a taut, thrumming line of anxiety and cold fury that led him unerringly up the mountain. He found the access road buried under 3 feet of fresh snow and followed it to a gate topped with razor wire and a sign that read, U.S. government property, and no trespassing, lethal force authorized. The lie was obvious to him now. The storm was his ally, The security cameras would be blinded. The external sensors would be overwhelmed. The guards would be huddled inside, complacent, believing no one would be mad enough to assault a fortress in such weather. Elias was that mad. He used the bolt cutters on the gate's lock, the sound masked by the howling wind. He moved like a phantom up the road, his white snowsuit making him invisible. He reached the main compound, a cluster of low, windowless concrete buildings and a large hangar, all dominated by a tall communications tower, now coated in a thick sleeve of ice. The bond pulled him towards the largest building, the lab. He bypassed the main entrance, remembering the blueprints he'd studied. Every building like this had maintenance accesses. He found a metal door set into the foundation, half buried in a snowdrift. It was locked with a heavy electronic keypad. He didn't try to hack it. He took a small block of C4 from his pack, set the detonator, and pressed it against the lock. The explosion was a muffled thump, swallowed by the storm. The door blew inward. Alarms immediately began to blare inside, a shrill, electronic shriek that was almost comforting in its predictability. He was in a utility corridor, pipes and conduits running along the walls. He moved quickly, his rifle at the ready. He encountered his first guard at a junction. The man was dressed in security gear, fumbling with his radio, his eyes wide with surprise. "Freeze!" the guard yelled, raising his weapon. Elias didn't hesitate. He fired twice. The guard fell. Elias felt a jolt, not of guilt, but of cold finality. There was no room for mercy here. These men had chosen their side. They were the jailers of his king. He followed the bond, a compass in his soul. It led him deeper into the complex, up a flight of stairs, and into a sterile, white hallway. The alarms were deafening here. He could hear shouts and running footsteps. They knew he was inside. He kicked open a set of double doors and found himself in the main laboratory. It was a scene from his nightmares. In the center of the room was a steel and plexiglass cage, and inside it was Fun. Fun was on his feet. He saw Elias, and a shockwave of pure, electric joy passed between them through the bond. Fun let out a roar that was not of rage, but of recognition, of hope. He slammed his body against the plexiglass, his ice-blue eyes blazing. Across the room, Dr. Eris Thorne stood frozen, a data pad in his hand. His face was a mask of utter disbelief. "You? How?" he stammered. Elias ignored him. He ran to the cage. "Fun, I'm here. Don't be a fool, Vance." Thorne shouted, recovering his composure. "You can't get him out. The cage is impregnable. Stand down and I might let you live." Elias looked at the control panel next to the cage. It was a complex console of lights and buttons. He raised his rifle and shot it. Sparks flew, and the console went dark. But the cage door didn't open. It was on a mechanical failsafe. Fun understood. He backed to the far wall of his cell. He looked at Elias, and then at the plexiglass wall. Elias understood too. He raised his rifle again, not at the console, but at the transparent wall itself. He fired. The high-power round left a star crack, but didn't penetrate. "It's 3 inches thick, you idiot." Thorne sneered. "You can't shoot your way in." Elias didn't need to. He was a distraction. While Elias had drawn all the attention, Fun had been focusing. All his fear, his rage, his loneliness, and his soaring, reignited hope, he channeled into a single, concentrated point. Not a wide blast, but a spear, a lance of absolute zero. He fixed his gaze on the star crack Elias's bullet had made. The air in front of his muzzle shimmered. A beam of pure, visible cold, blue-white and solid-looking, shot from him and struck the exact center of the crack. The effect was instantaneous. The plexiglass, stressed by the bullet impact, could not handle the extreme, localized thermal shock. With a sound like a mountain cracking in two, the entire wall crazed over with a million fractures. For a suspended second, it looked like a sheet of diamond lace. Then it exploded inward in a shower of a million crystalline shards. Fun was free. He leaped from the wreckage of his cage, a avenging god of winter. His roar shook the very foundations of the building. He landed in the middle of the lab, his power radiating from him in waves. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost flash froze across every surface, the computers, the tables, the walls. The fire suppression system went off, but the mist simply froze and fell to the ground as ice pellets. Thorne stared, his scientific curiosity finally, and fatally, replaced by abject terror. He turned to run. Fun was on him in 2 bounds. He didn't bite. He didn't maul. He simply placed a massive paw on Thorne's back, pinning him to the freezing floor. He lowered his head, his muzzle inches from Thorne's face, and let out a low, rumbling growl. His breath, visible in the Arctic air, frosted Thorne's glasses solid. Elias walked over, his boots crunching on the frozen mist. He looked down at the terrified man. "You thought he was a specimen," Elias said, his voice quiet and deadly. "You thought you could cage winter. You were wrong." He looked at Fun. "He's yours, boy." Fun looked from Thorne's terrified face to Elias's. The bond flowed between them, a river of shared understanding. Killing this man would be justice, but it would also make them monsters in truth. They were more than that. Fun lifted his paw. He gave Thorne a contemptuous shove with his nose that sent the doctor sliding across the icy floor into a bank of dead computers. A warning, a lesson. Then Fun turned to Elias. He nudged him gently, whining softly, checking him for injuries. The terrifying beast was gone, replaced once more by the loyal companion. The alarms were still blaring. They had to go. Elias put a hand on Fun's head. "Let's go home, boy." Together, man and myth, they turned their backs on the frozen ruin of the lab and walked out into the heart of the storm, leaving behind only the cold and the memory of their reckoning. They didn't run. They walked, side by side, back into the teeth of the blizzard. The storm, which had been their cloak, was now their welcoming committee. The wind that had screamed in fury now seemed to sing a song of triumph. The driving snow was not an enemy, but a veil, hiding them from the world once more. The bond between them, stretched and strained to its limit, now felt stronger than steel, more precious than diamond. It hummed with a quiet, powerful energy as they moved through the whiteout conditions. Fun led the way, his supernatural senses effortlessly navigating the hidden landscape, his massive body cutting a path through the deep drifts for Elias to follow. He was no longer just a companion. He was a guide, a protector returned to his rightful place. They walked for hours, until the sounds of alarms and the stench of mankind were far behind them. They crested a high ridge, and below them lay the familiar, sleeping expanse of their valley. And there, nestled in the trees by the frozen creek, was the cabin. Its roof was heavy with snow, smoke curling from a chimney. Elias had banked a fire before he left, a stubborn act of hope. It was a beacon. It was home. As they descended the ridge, a strange quiet fell between them. The urgency was gone, replaced by a profound, weary peace. They reached the clearing. The scars of the previous battle were still there. The frozen patch of ice, the tracks long since filled with snow. But they were healing, being absorbed back into the landscape. Elias pushed open the damaged door and stepped inside. The cabin was still a wreck, but it was their wreck. It was filled with the memories of their life together. Fun followed him in, his great body barely fitting through the doorway. He shook his coat, sending a shower of melting snow across the room, and then looked around, sniffing the air, refamiliarizing himself with every scent. Elias dropped his pack and his rifle by the door with a heavy thud. The adrenaline that had sustained him for days finally drained away, leaving him hollow and exhausted. He sank into his worn armchair by the fireplace, the very chair he'd been sitting in the night. He heard Fun's first cry in the blizzard. Fun came over and laid down at his feet, resting his massive head on Elias's boots with a deep, contented sigh. The rumbling purr started up at his chest, a vibration Elias could feel through the floorboards. It was the sound of home. Elias reached down and laid his hand on Fun's head, his fingers tracing the familiar, jagged white scar, the mark of the storm. It was no longer a target. It was a crown. He looked at the photograph of Alara on the mantel. He didn't feel the old, sharp grief. He felt a gentle sadness, but also a profound gratitude. She had been the love of his past. Fun was the love of his present, the reason for his future. She would have understood. "They'll come back, you know," Elias said softly, speaking to the fire and the Fun. "Thorne, or others like him. The world now knows you exist." Fun lifted his head and looked at Elias. His ice-blue eyes were calm. Knowing, he let out a soft chuff. The message was clear. Let them come. Elias smiled, a true, deep smile that reached his eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. He had thought he was saving a puppy from a storm, but the storm had saved him. It had brought him a purpose, a family, a love that was as fierce and wild and beautiful as a winter sunrise. He was no longer just Elias Vance, the grieving hermit. He was Elias Vance, the guardian of the last great myth, the sworn sword of the Winter King. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, listening to the wind howl outside and the deep, rumbling purr of the creature at his feet. They were two scars on the heart of the world, a man and a myth bound together by a blizzard. The world was vast and full of dangers, but in this small cabin, at the heart of the storm they commanded, they were untouchable. They were home. What an incredible journey that was. From a lonely man in a cabin to the guardian of a living legend. It makes you wonder, what would you have done in Elias's place? Would you have braved the blizzard for that tiny cry? Could you have faced down an entire corporation to save a friend? The bond between Elias and Fun is something truly special. It makes me think about the incredible connections we can form with the world around us. I want to hear from you in the comments. What was the most heart-pounding moment for you? Was it Fun's first howl, the siege at the cabin, or the final reckoning in the lab? If you discovered a creature like Fun, would you try to reveal it to the world, or would you guard its secret with your life? Just like Elias? Let's get a conversation going. And if the story of loyalty, sacrifice, and elemental power resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more unique, mind-blowing tales. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying things we find are the ones that teach us how to love again. Thanks for watching.